What's going on, guys? Hope everybody's having a great day. Please do me a favor, smash that like button for me. And if you get anything from the content, subscribe to the channel. I really would appreciate it. Now, when we talk about the internet and influencers and YouTubers talking about case and influencing people to think one way or another, the media is the biggest influencer of all. They've been around for a long time. They used to have this game all to themselves. They could come out and they could tell you a story and they could pick and choose and cherry pick whatever part of the story they wanted to let you know, whatever part of the story they wanted to report on, and leave out things that went against their narrative. And you'd never be none the wiser because, hey, you don't know, right? You're not taking your time to do a deep dive on these cases and go through these motions and these files and the evidence that's presented and try to figure out what's going on. You're just listening to the news and they're going to tell you. You're just going to believe them, right? Blindly believe them. But nowadays we have YouTube and we have YouTubers and we have streamers and we have Twitch. We have all these different platforms where regular people like me, I'm a regular guy, construction worker, a millwright by trade, welder, crane operator, heavy equipment, whatever. If it has to do with commercial construction, I do it. But I'm just a regular guy. I'm nobody special. But when I look at these cases and I hear what's being said and I see what's being done, I want to speak up about it, because the last thing that I want is to be in the crosshairs of a prosecutor and that prosecutor not held to a certain standard to prove that I did what he's accusing me of doing. You have to prove it. And just because you may feel a certain way, just because you may dislike this person or think that they look weird or think that they're creepy or they remind you of somebody else who did something similar, it doesn't matter. You have to prove that that person did it. So let's talk about what happened in this motion hearing for Bryan Kohberger in the Idaho Four Case, right? You've got Bryan Kohbergers Defense arguing about the genetic genealogy and how the prosecutors ended up finding the match to Kohberger. Now, what they're shooting for here is fruit of the poisonous tree. If you don't understand what that means, I'm about to tell you right now. Kohberger's lawyers want to know where the DNA match came from when they first matched Bryan Kohberger to the DNA on the knife sheath. Now, we remember that it was Bryan Kohberger's father was the father of whoever's DNA was on the knife sheath. And then once they used that to go farther, they were able to swab Bryan Kohberger and match him directly. The fruit of the poisonous tree says that if that DNA was tainted to begin with, not only are you using unverified sources in order to get a warrant to search for Bryan Kohberger's actual DNA or any evidence found in Bryan Kohberger's home, office, apartment, or car, but because you use that faulty evidence to get access to the new evidence has to be thrown out with that faulty evidence. So, fruit of the poisonous tree refers to evidence where the investigator broke the law or went around the law in order to achieve this evidence. And if evidence is found from prosecutors breaking the law, not doing the right thing, violating Bryan Kohberger's rights per se, then you have to say, okay, well, that evidence cannot come into this trial. If we're talking about the DNA, the only connection that the general public knows about to the Bryan Kohberger case, well, that's a big, big deal, because without any connection of Bryan Kohberger to the victims, well, you're not going to find him guilty, right? You have to have something suggesting that he's connected to him, some reason that Bryan Kohberger is accused of taking these people's lives. And if you can't mention the fact that his DNA was found at the crime scene, then all you have is him leaving his house hours before the attack, turning his phone off, him driving around town, a car like his pulling up at the house and leaving the house between 4 and 4:25, and then him going back home later on around 5. You don't have anything tying him directly there. You don't have anything putting him at the scene of the crime. And if you can't prove that this man was at the scene of the crime, well, you don't have a case against him. You're not going to convince a jury who have to be convinced beyond reasonable doubt that this person committed this crime when the only thing you have is that they were not at home. That's a huge deal. And I know the cell phone data and stuff, but I don't know that that's really going to help the prosecution. The prosecutor has to prove that Bryan Kohberger did this beyond reasonable doubt. And if they can't even connect him to the victims, put him at the scene, can't even connect him saying, well, his DNA was at the scene, so at some point in time in history, he was at the scene, because that's what DNA can't do. DNA cannot tell you when something happened. It can only tell you that something possibly happened. And why do I say possibly there? Because we're talking about a minuscule amount of touch DNA. That touch DNA could be from Bryan Kohberger himself touching that sheath. It could also be from somebody touching Bryan Kohberger and touching that sheath. It could also be from somebody touching something that Bryan Kohberger touched and then touching that sheath. You understand where we're going here? Now, I'm not trying to make an argument that that's not Bryan Kohberger's DNA, that that's not Bryan Kohberger's sheath. I'm not trying to make an argument whether Bryan Kohberger is guilty or innocent. I'm just telling you what the law is, right? And what I do care about is if there's an innocent man being charged for a crime and then the prosecutors know that they're playing fast and loose with the evidence and they're not turning over evidence that could be exculpatory. As the defendant, you're supposed to be given every available opportunity to defend yourself. You're supposed to be given the benefit of the doubt that you're innocent, and the burden of proof falls on the prosecutor. Now, once you're accused of this, a lot of people like to look at it and say, well, prove you didn't do it then. But that's not the way the law works. That's not the way court works. The prosecutor is going to say, you did this. Bryan Kohberger's team is going to say, he did not do this. And then the prosecutor is going to present a case to try and convict Bryan Kohberger of the crime. And to do that, they have to prove it beyond reasonable doubt. Now, what that means, it's subjective. It's subjective to what reasonable is, right? Now, within reason, most of us can understand that, well, if all these signs point to this being true, then it's probably true. But probably is not good enough. More likely than not is not the standard. Proof beyond doubt is the standard. It's the standard how we convict people. And the reason that that is the standard is because you don't want to put an innocent man behind bars. If you lock an innocent person up for a crime, whoever committed that crime is walking the streets. So you have a guilty man walking free, right? So it's always better to let a guilty man walk free than arrest an innocent man, because if you arrest an innocent man, you're still letting the guilty man walk free. This is common sense, and we used to know that in this country. I'm not going to sit here and root for Bryan Kohberger to be found not guilty. I have no reason to root for Bryan Kohberger to be found not guilty. What I root for is justice. What I root for is that the system works the way it should. The last thing I want is to be caught in the crosshairs of a system that doesn't have to prove beyond doubt. They have to convince people that it's probably true. We don't want that. That's not the way the system works. That's not the way the system will ever work. Bryan Kohberger is innocent until proven guilty. And if the prosecutors can't use the DNA evidence, the only known connection we have of Bryan Kohberger to the victims, then they don't have a whole lot of a case. Now, we don't know what we don't know. As far as the gag order is concerned, it stopped us from being able to see a lot. But as we see more and more come out through these hearings and all the different motions and what the prosecution says and what the defense team says and the responses back and forth to each other and the rulings of the judge, we start to get a pretty good idea of what this case looks like, how weak or how strong this case may be. Now, to me, it looks pretty weak minus the DNA evidence. The DNA evidence says that, hey, there's some sort of connection between Bryan Kohberger and these victims. Whether he has been there before, whether he was there during the time that this crime was committed, whether he knows somebody who has been there. What do you guys think? Let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. Like the video, subscribe to the channel to see more, hit that notification bell so you'll get notified every time I post. Have a great day, and we'll see you later.